So the Holley Sniper EFI and the Dodge D100 Shop Truck project has left the chat. It's decided it just doesn't want to work anymore. So we're going old school, back to carburetor. The Holley is dead. Long live Holley. So recently been dealing with some electrical issues on the D100 and ended up replacing the CDI box, the ignition box, tested it afterwards, and then the Holley EFI, the sniper system, smoked. Don't know if one led to the other, probably, not sure which led to which. Either case, the Holley Sniper EFI is no more. So, fortunately, I recently did a Facebook Marketplace Holley carburetor rebuild. It was a little 4160, like a 650 CFM carburetor, but that's not the carburetor going on the truck. You'll see what I found and what's going to be going on there. But we got to tear everything apart. All right, so I've got the fuel line here clamped, coming off the bottom of the tank, going into the filter. I'm going to pop these lines off. Crack that line loose going from the filter into the Holley Sniper pump. And then probably lose whatever gas is in the line. But that's fine. Yep, there it goes. Let that drip for a little bit. But I got the line clamped coming from the tank, so let that drain a little bit, and then I'll pop the other lines off and we'll get that filter out. So fortunately, when I originally got this truck, it had this Edelbrock carb on it, and I did a rebuild on this and it ran okay. But again, I think this one was just too small for this thing being a 417 stroker. I believe this is like another 600 CFM carburetor, and it's just old and gunked up, even though I did clean it. Not the best carburetor. Not going with this one either, but because I did originally have a carburetor on here and redid the fuel system, I still have my original, or my carburetor rated fuel pressure regulator. So that's good. So that'll be going back in. And somewhere, not in here obviously, I do have a fuel pump, an electric pump, that's for a carburetor instead of the one that I currently have that's fuel injection. Now I just got to find it because it's not in this box. All right, so I've got the regulator, found the fuel pump. Now, like I said, I recently did a rebuild on this Holley 4160. I believe it's like a 6 or a 600 CFM. I was going to run this. This was my first thought when that Sniper died in the last video. This was initially what I thought of. But I went on to Facebook Marketplace, came across a really good deal. There was a guy selling just a couple boxes full of Holley parts. There's a bunch of like power valves. There was an entire jet kit, bunch of just gaskets and pieces, just years of collecting Holley parts. He was selling it. He was also selling a couple of carburetors. So hit the guy up, went and checked out what he had, bought the box of parts, and then the carburetor that he had, I was really interested in. Wasn't really willing to pay what he wanted for it, but then he gave me a really good deal, and I picked it up. It's right here behind me on the bench. You're gonna have to keep watching to see what's going on there, though. But let's go ahead and get the pump out, get the regulator replaced, and then yank the Sniper off the engine, pull all the wiring out, and we can get to installing this beautiful piece of Holley equipment right back here. As you heard, I got the fuel pump hooked up. I got the regulator hooked up here, and I'm set to about 6.5 PSI. Just got a cap on it right now just so I can adjust the pressure. Got the pump just kind of hardwired over to the battery over there. Just checking for leaks, make sure we're good up to this point. Everything looks good. So I'm ready to start pulling the Sniper off, get the carburetor installed, and then run the fuel line from the regulator to the carburetor. Be ready to start tuning. All right, so I've got all of the Sniper stuff pulled out. There's the throttle body, wiring, fuel lines, all that good stuff is out. And then while I was in here, so I had to obviously cut a lot of the wiring free, wiring bundle, stuff like that. So I had doing a lot of cleanup of the wiring. But while I was in here with the wiring, I went ahead and I installed a circuit breaker. I got real tired of all the troubleshooting I was doing with the electrical problems. That was a 30 amp fuse and I kept blowing it. So I was going through a lot of fuses. Well, I bought a 30 amp circuit breaker. Now that's installed in place of the main fuse that was powering pretty much all of the switchable power. So 30 amp breaker instead of a fuse. You know, and another kind of plus side of pulling the Sniper out when it comes to the wiring, it just looks a whole lot cleaner. I don't have that one big cable bundle going along the firewall with a big connector and another fuse, and there was something else up there too. What was it? A relay. So yeah, it just really cleaned up the wiring on the firewall. What I'm gonna do though is, so I've got a connector on the firewall. It's that blue one right there, and that goes back to the fuel pump. And what I'm gonna do with that is I'm gonna run that over to the relay that I was using for the switchable power for the Sniper. I'm gonna put that wire, I'm gonna extend it over to a relay, and that way when I turn the ignition on, the fuel pump will kick on, but it'll be through a relay, so it'll actually be getting power off the main power and not off the switchable. And it'll just be another kind of like a layer of protection for the fuel pump. And I'm also going to add a fuse on that. That is only a 30 amp relay. So again, if that fuel pump fails, it should take the relay with it. But I may put a little bit smaller fuse just because I've already had that relay blow once during all this fiasco. So yeah, I think I'll maybe add a 20 amp fuse to that and see what happens. I had to go dig through my stash, see if I have a fusible relay or an inline fuse for that. Can you hear that? It's a couple of cats. All right, so here's where we're at. Everything's out. Wiring is all cleaned up. I've got the fuel pump now running off of a switched circuit going through a relay, a 30 amp relay. It's got a 20 amp fuse on it also. So hopefully if there's ever an issue with that pump, it'll blow the fuse, won't kill the relay. That's all done. Think I am about ready to drop the carburetor on. Now, like I said, my original thought was to go with this Holley 4160. It's like a 650 CFM. This is what I was going to go with. This is what I immediately thought of on the last video when the Sniper decided to die. But like I said, Facebook Marketplace can be a wonderful thing. When I went to talk to that guy about all of his Holley parts, he pulled this out. Now, from what he told me, what he was told when he bought it, is that it's an 850. It's had some work done to it. Maybe an 870 CFM. Might be a little much for this engine, being a 417 stroker. Might be a little bit much, but not exactly sure the model number on this. I've been trying to look it up and I can't really find anything. It's only got like idle mixture screws on the primary, none on the secondary. I thought there were. Thought they were missing, so I was messing with it. I don't believe those are actually idle mixture screws. Those cats are going nuts. But like I said, I believe it's an 850 CFM. So I'm going to drop this bad boy on there. Obviously vacuum secondary. Got the fuel line ready to go. So I'm going to go drop this thing on the truck. Plumb the fuel. I'm not going to worry about hooking up the throttle pedal yet. And drop this thing on there. Kick the ignition on. See if this thing fills up. Hopefully it doesn't leak. I did have to replace some seals in it. Along like the metering block and the cover that in the bowl. Those were actually missing, so I installed those, but I got those out of that box of parts. But everything else, the needles aren't stuck, everything else looks really good, so this bad boy's going on the truck. So obviously, dilemma, got the carb on, hooked up the fuel, turned the fuel on, and fuel kind of went everywhere. It was leaking down into the intake. Probably just needle and seats. There's still fuel in the bowl. It's squirting. But it also was coming out around the base. So yeah, I think I need to disassemble this thing further. So I'm going to take the bowls apart, make sure everything there looks good. And then maybe I'll take the base off and see if that gasket is shot. But yeah, so, oh well, I mean, I could slap, I still have that smaller 4160. Could still slap that on there, but I really want to get this going. Let me break this down, and I'll bring you in, hopefully, once I find something. All right, so here's where I'm at right now. I took the 4160, and that is on the truck. That one seems to be okay. There was a little bit of leakage. I think it was just the needle and seat. That one seems to be okay. I do have to replace the gaskets at the base of the carburetor against the intake manifold. A lot of fuel. They just kind of started falling apart on me a little bit. But it's sitting on there, and it's got fuel in it. And it leaked a little bit, but I think it was just the needle and seat. Once I gave them a couple of whacks, it stopped leaking. This one, I think it's the needle and seat also. So, tore it apart again, and both needle and seats, I'm going to try to, hopefully this will show up. But that rubber gasket, that rubber O-ring right there, on both of them, is really, really flat. I don't think that was sealing around the edge. Focus, there we go. I don't think it was actually sealing in the hole where it goes into the bowl, because I think this O-ring is just worn out. So, tore it all apart again, replaced both needle and seats here, both of them. So this is the other side. This one looks just as bad. Hopefully that'll show up good. You see, that O-ring is just flat. There is no sealing around the edge of that. So that may have been it. I also ran in the new needle and seat pretty far. So I'm going to maybe mess around with the other one. It's getting late, so I'll be back on it tomorrow. But this one, I think, the other one seems to be okay, so I want to put this one back in. I really want to run this one. So I have the needle and seats set really low so that the bowls should sit really low. My fuel pressure into the carburetor is only at like 6 psi, so it shouldn't be an issue. I think it's just needle and seats. I think it was just getting past those. I don't know. I'll try it again tomorrow, but tomorrow for me, for you, it'll be just a second. Morning. So, did a bunch of reading last night, trying to do some research, see if I could figure out what else would cause the fuel to leak, basically from the bowls through the jets into the intake. Besides the needle and seat issue that I found yesterday. Came up with some ideas. So one of the first things I did was want to make sure my floats were actually floating. So threw some gas in here, threw in both floats, let them sit for a while, and they seem to be good. They're floating. They're not like saturated. There's no pinholes. They're not taking on gas, or they're not sinking, anything like that. They are in fact floating. So that's good. The next thing I did was I checked kind of the back of the float. You know, I wanted to make sure, because this is actually how it goes in there. You can kind of bend. Let me see if I can. There we go. You can kind of bend on this tab right here to kind of maybe help adjust it so it actually presses, so it sits maybe lower in the bowl just a little bit based on that. So I checked those, make sure they weren't all out of whack. They look good. They should be able to press on the needle and seat before the fuel level gets too high. I said I'm going to obviously, when I put it back together, because right now I've got it all apart here still, before I put it back together, I'm going to run those needle and seats down a little bit and keep that fuel level low, and then I can adjust it to the sight levels on the bowls. I don't think they were too high, but they could have been. It's another thing that I did. So I'm going to run those seats, needle and seat, basically all the way down. Power valve. So I double checked my power valve. The one that was in here was like a 3.5, way too low, I think, for my application. So I installed a 6.5. Plus, I don't know the condition of that 3.5. That could have been bad. So I installed the 6.5. Looks like it's relatively new, really new actually. And I replaced the gasket behind it. Made sure that stayed aligned as I tightened it down. I kind of did it inverted. That way I can keep an eye on the gasket. Ran it up, tighten it down. So I did that. The vents. I took some Berryman carb cleaner and sprayed it down through all of the vents and made sure that they came out of the where they're supposed to come out in the throttle body back into the bowl, basically. Each vent has a corresponding orifice on the faces. That way that can, obviously vent out of the bowl. So I ran some carb cleaner through those, made sure those were all clear. Everything looked fine there. What else? The only other thing I want to check, so I'm going to throw a straight edge on the face of the carb. Make sure that's not warped from somebody maybe over tightening this stuff. Maybe something got out of whack there. I doubt it, but I'm going to check it. I got my notes over here, stuff to look at. Cleaned the air bleeds. I'm going to double check my jets. I'm probably going to replace them. I don't even know what's in here, so I want to do that before I put it back together. It has nothing to do with the leak though. But yeah, I think that's air bleeds, power valve, float level, warped carb body. So I'm going to check that. Air bleeds. I went through all of my metering block gaskets. They're all the same. It could possibly be a wrong gasket. I was reading some stuff last night about power valves or metering blocks, and if they're aftermarket, I forget. You guys are going to have to leave some comments below if you know what I'm talking about. There's an aftermarket billet type of metering block that takes a different gasket or something. This one definitely looks like it could be an aftermarket one. I should look up that part number and see. Maybe the gasket, but it was leaking from both sides. More definitely though from the primary. But I'm going to double check that. But all my gaskets look good. I did replace them just because. So I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this thing. And then I have a setup that I want to do to test it. I overnighted from Amazon a cheap little electric fuel pump. It only goes like 4 to 6 PSI, which should be perfect for this carburetor. Basically any carburetor, really. Don't want it to go too high. So I'm going to reassemble this, and I'm going to put a catch can underneath it. I'm going to do my testing here on the bench, rather than putting it in the truck, hooking everything up, turning the pump on, and letting it all leak down into the engine. If I have a leak, at least here I'll be able to go into a catch can here on the workbench, and I won't have to keep like installing it, removing it, installing it, removing it, and so on. So let me get this thing back together. I'll get set up to test it, and then I'll bring you guys back for that. All right, so here's what I've got going on so far. Here you can see I've got fuel pump running. You hear it running. Hopefully that shows up good. Gas can, pump, into a leaky fuel line because I didn't have an AN brass for that, so it's just wrapped with plumber's tape and it's holding. All right, coming down into the carb. Oops, I want to knock that over. I've got both the sight glasses, the plugs on the side of the bowls pulled off so that I can see the fuel level in there. Right now, nothing is leaking. Damn, neighbors' dogs are going nuts. All right, so, but nothing's leaking. I can see fuel in the bowl. I did have a couple of leaks. First, I had a loose bowl bolt. That seems to be good. But right now, nothing is leaking anywhere. So, what I'm going to do now, nothing's leaking down inside, which is good, because that was the big problem I was having. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the front bowl. I'm going to adjust the needle and seat until I just see gas come out of here. I'm probably going to get some out of the top. I think once I pop that seal, once I loosen that, that's going to start to leak possibly. But yeah, so I'm going to adjust the front needle of the seat and then the rear needle of the seat. All right, so I don't really know what's going on with my audio today, but this is the second time I had to do a voiceover. Once for another video that I did earlier, and now for this one. Anyway, so here I am just kind of adjusting the needle and seat. So like I said, I have the sight port open on the side, and as I crack the top, obviously fuel started to leak on out of there, and then I could slowly bring up the needle and seat to raise the float bowl level up to the point where fuel started to come out of that sight port on the side. I'm doing this real slow. It's kind of frustrating because fuel was just going everywhere out of the top, and then as it started to come out the side, trying to keep it clean and trying to get everything adjusted and be able to see if it's still flowing out of the side was kind of a pain. And then of course right there I move the carburetor around, which causes the fuel in the bowl to slosh around, and it came out the port some more. So I had to kind of kept having to wipe everything down, keep checking everything, taking my time, doing it real slow, looking for any other leaks, making sure that even as I bought the needle and seat up to raise the level in the bowl, I was also looking down inside the carburetor also to make sure there was no fuel leaking down inside the carb, and there wasn't. This whole time I was adjusting these needle and seats, there was no fuel leaking down inside the bowl. So, I would make an adjustment, tighten it down, and then verify that there was no fuel leaking out the side. If there was, I'd have to, like here, crack it loose, and then move it back down, and just do this over and over again to the point where the fuel was just barely not coming out of the side sight port there on the side of the bowl. It was just a process, loosen everything up, make a few adjustments, tighten it down, give it time to settle, see what's happening. But this was the only spot during the adjustments that I was getting fuel out of the carburetor, was when I was making these adjustments or sloshing the fuel around in the bowl, causing it to come out the side. But overall, it's a quick and easy process. And doing this on this fuel can or on this drain pan, this worked out great. This really, kind of contained all the gas. I didn't have gas dripping all over my engine. I didn't have gas going inside my intake. This was a lot. Plus, I wasn't having to sit in an engine bay or lean over a fender or whatever. This on the bench, if you're into carburetors and, adjusting them and doing this type of work, I highly recommend that you do a setup like this. I mean, this was all self-contained, nice, neat, made for some easy adjustments. And of course, once I got all the adjustments done to the front bowl, it was time for the rear bowl, the secondaries. So it was the same thing. Keeping an eye on the fuel in the bowl. You can kind of see in there a little bit, and with a good light, you can get a nice little reflection and kind of get an idea of how low the fuel is in the bowl. But again, make the adjustments, loosen the needle and seat, make your adjustments, tighten it down, clean it up, look for leaks, look for fuel coming out the side port, and just go from there. Again, really simple doing it like this on the bench. As you can see, the carburetor is no longer on the bench. It's in the truck. I let it sit here on the bench like half an hour with the pump running. The only leak that I had was the front bowl, the lower like left bowl mounting bolt. It was just kind of seeping. Like one drip, maybe two over that whole half hour. So when I shut it all down, before I put it in the truck, I replaced the seal, the nylon washer on that bolt. It's in the truck. The pump is running in the truck now. No leaks. But I have a different issue. The carburetor studs, or the mounting studs on the driver's side, are like 1/2 inch too short. I've got a 1/2 inch carb spacer there from when I had the Holley Sniper, trying to help alleviate maybe some heat soak into the Sniper. So I wanted to leave that spacer there. So I've got the carb mounted, but I can't mount my throttle and kickdown cable bracket because it hits the lever for the accelerator pump. So I just ordered some longer studs. They'll be here tomorrow. But I do have it bolted in. I could start it and just run it without the throttle cable, which I was kind of planning on doing anyway. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. So day 3 of working on this project ended yesterday's video with getting ready to start the truck. Couldn't find my keys. Realized they were locked in the truck. So I had to deal with that. And then I went and helped Caden out, neighbor kid out, with his 2002 Mitsubishi Galant. It's his first car, doing a whole video series of stuff we're working on that thing. So I'll leave a link to that video series up here. Go check it out. Like I said, it's the kid's first car. He's eager to learn things, so I've been helping him out with that. But I got my keys, so let's go to the truck. I will get it turned on. We'll get the fuel flowing. And I'm going to start it with a switch. So the throttle's not hooked up yet. I'm still waiting on those longer carb mounting studs. So it's all going to be run from under the hood. So let's get set up and get that thing going. So I don't know what's going on with my mic lately, but got to do another voiceover. So here I'm just showing that, you know, obviously the engine's running. I spent some time before I started recording this to work out some of the bugs. I had to remove the spacer under the carburetor because it was causing vacuum leaks. I wanted to make sure that there were no other leaks as far as fuel or anything like that. So everything was good. I did have to pull the plugs because the other day when the carb was leaking, it hydrolocked the engine. So I had to go and blow the cylinders out. But now it's just a matter of, now that I got it running and up to temperature, I want to start playing with settings, dialing in the fuel, dialing in the idle fuel mixture, dialing in the timing. I believe I was at about 18 degrees of initial timing. So I loosened the distributor up so I can play with that, kind of played with it a little bit, trying to get the highest reading I can here on the vacuum gauge. Now the vacuum gauge I got hooked up to the front of the carburetor, and I've done another video where I was talking about tuning a carburetor or tuning an engine with a vacuum gauge. Basically you want to make your adjustments, and I'll link to that up above that video, but you want to adjust your idle mixture screws and even your idle if need be in your timing, trying to get the highest reading you can on that vacuum gauge without adversely affecting obviously the performance of the engine, without it running too rich, without it going too lean. You really want to pay attention to that. So right now I've got the idle set, and I believe that looks like it's about 800 RPM, which is right about where I would like this thing to be. Between 8 and 900 RPM. This engine really seems to like to idle at that. At least it did with the Sniper. So here I've got it all set up. It's idling about 800. You see I'm running about 14 or 15 inches of vacuum. So this is where I'm going to start messing with and adjusting those idle mixture screws, and do it a little bit at a time. You make a little adjustment while watching the vacuum gauge, and what you do on one side you want to do to the other, and you're going to make a slight adjustment and see what happens to that vacuum gauge. The vacuum goes up, obviously the engine likes it. If it goes down, engine doesn't like it. So you do it to one side and then you make the same adjustment to the other, kind of always keeping the two sides adjusted equally. So again, it's just little changes, maybe a quarter turn or an eighth of a turn at a time. You might want to kind of like blip the throttle once you make some changes and let it settle and see where that vacuum gauge settles at. So I'm just kind of going back and forth here, making those adjustments. And I'm also going and then I'm going to look at the idle some more, make sure it's still idling at about where I want it. You know, you can hear the idle change sometimes, so you might have to make your mixture screw adjustment and then maybe adjust the idle setting. So again, here I'm still messing with those mixture screws. Again, keeping an eye on that vacuum gauge. Really wanting to see if the vacuum goes up, goes down, what each little adjustment does to that vacuum gauge to see if the engine does in fact like it. And it's just a process, back and forth, making slight adjustments here and there, and just seeing what those adjustments do. See, the vacuum went up a little bit, so it's still liking those settings. But again, it's just a process, back and forth. Now I'm going to hit the throttle here, kind of give it some gas, and then let it settle back down and see. Now I also noticed at that point that I need to readjust my accelerator, or the acceleration lever, the acceleration valve. It was a little slow to kick in. I had really backed it off. I wanted to make sure I wasn't putting any pressure on that valve with it just sitting here running. So again, look at the idle. It's still idling about where I like it, right around that 800 to 900 RPM range. Might be, it's kind of hard to tell right there. But, you know, again, just always constantly back and forth. It is a process. It is kind of a pain. One thing I did notice that I liked is once I got this all done and dialed in where I wanted it, I did notice that I was able to kind of lean out the mixture a little bit and the vacuum still went up. Well, you can hear that thing just chugging away in the background. I'm at like 800 RPM at idle. I got 18 degrees of initial timing. Like I said, I believe it's like 36 all in. One thing I have noticed now that I got it all kind of dialed in with the Holley Sniper, it was always running fat, always running rich. There was always moisture at the tailpipes. Right, I don't know if it was like unburned fuel, what it was. I got none of that with this carburetor. Maybe I just got it dialed in. Now there is a slight exhaust leak, but it should be downstream. I know where it is. It's downstream of the O2 sensor. Actually, there's one on the left side that's not even connected to the O2 sensor. And there's one downstream of the O2 sensor, like at the muffler on the driver's side. So that shouldn't have affected the O2 sensor for the Sniper. But I got this thing dialed in and there is no moisture out at the exhaust pipes, out, you know, at the exhaust tips. So yeah, maybe it's just not running as rich. So they got the carb dialed in. But I am really happy with that. Now, that carb doesn't have a choke, so it is a little difficult to start at first. I'll have to let it sit overnight and try it again tomorrow, fully cold, and see how it starts. Cold, relative. I'm in Vegas. It doesn't get that cold here, so I don't think not having a choke isn't going to be that much big of an issue. But yeah, this thing is running like a top. And the electrical issues I had in this previous video, it was either the CDI box or the Holley Sniper, because that thing is sitting solid at like 14.1 volts or something like that. It's just solid. So the alternator's fine. I don't know if the Sniper maybe took the ignition or the ignition killed the Sniper. I think the Sniper killed the ignition because I got one good start out of it after replacing the ignition, and then the Sniper was dead. So I think the Sniper was the cause of all of the electrical issues. I don't know, theorizing. I may get in touch with Holley and have them take a look at it. But again, I don't think we're gonna be able to tell which, you know, chicken or the egg, which one killed what. I have no idea. But I really appreciate you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe, hit the bell, and I am so happy to get this thing back together. Should be back on the road once I get the throttle linkage figured out, where it's not hitting the accelerator pump. See you on the next one.